Welcome to another podcast from People and Dancefloors Egypt, where we are continuing our exploration into the Cairo club and underground music scene. My name is Anthony Killick, and as usual, I'm joined today by my friend and colleague. It's music journalist Yusha Charles.
Hello there, guys. Nice to see you again.
And today we're going to be talking to someone who has been, let's say, highly impactful in the development of the jungle scene in Cairo in particular, but also certainly in Egypt and the wider Middle East. I would go so far as to say this is probably the most prominent person of that kind of musical production genre in Cairo at this point in time. So that would be our guest, Ahmed El Ghazuli, aka ZULI, all caps. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you've been particularly influential, not just in terms of musical development of this particular genre or series of genres, but also when it comes to creating the literal physical infrastructure of the kind of Cairo underground music scene. We'll talk about all of that going forward, but I wanted to just begin by discussing how the kinds of electronic music you play are quite far removed from other musical forms in Cairo.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think? Is there really a place for jungle, grime, and similar musical genres in this city? And what has been your inspiration for wanting to produce and play this kind of music?
I think there is a place now. It's small. It's growing slowly but steadily. Well, that wasn't the case when we started out. And when I say we, I mean Vent, which is me and my best friend Asim Teg, who makes music under tag with $3 signs. We kind of stumbled upon the venue that eventually became Vent in 2013. It was pure luck, really. Right place at the right time. We used to run a music magazine. It was actually a popular culture magazine. It wasn't just music. But we would write about music that no one cared about in Cairo. Eventually went bankrupt. And our lawyer at the time had a client who was running the club in downtown. It was a club in downtown called Arabesque. The clientele was mainly, businessmen, and they do like what they called Beledi house nights, and it's just a completely different scene. But around the time the revolution happened, because of where the venue is, it's literally 3 minutes away, a 3-minute walk from Tahrir Square. So it scared away the clientele, and the place wasn't doing well at all. And they were just looking for anyone to take over and kind of bring in just, a new breath of life into the place. So we were kind of like the obvious choice out of the people who spoke to the guy. We had this system where, so we didn't necessarily have to make money as Vent. We just had to bring in enough people to make the place look good, and at the end of the month we get a fixed fee. So we put together a plan where we would book everyone we were interested in throughout the week, like 5 days a week, and essentially lose money. And then on the weekends we put on house and techno nights, and then make all that money back. That's obviously not the smartest business model if you're a businessman, if you're looking to make money. So around the second season, some drama happened between the owners, and new people took over. They weren't too happy with that business model. And by the end of that season, things just weren't working out and we had to leave. During that time, I'd say the most important thing we did was give a platform for artists who were making this type of music or these types of music. And when I say these types of music, it's not just electronic underground music, it's also hip hop at the time, which is difficult to imagine at the moment. Hip hop's so big in Egypt. But at the time, it was nothing. No one listened to hip hop, but we've always been massive fans of hip hop. We had 2 hip hop nights a week. No one would come to any of these nights. Post-punk and punk, obscure guitar bands, experimental noise. No one would come to these nights. Like the average attendance was I'd say between 5 and 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of gave hope and it created a space for a community to build. And we ended up debuting 40 artists who then went on to do interesting stuff. Most of them, at least, not obviously not all of them. But I would say a scene where we have fans and people who are into the music, I don't think that there was ever that really until 2017 when a club night called Jelly Zone surfaced. You're probably aware of Jelly Zone if you're in Cairo.
Yeah.
It was started by one of our resident DJs, Amr Al Alami, 1127, and another DJ who's still running it now. Amr's not doing it anymore, but Donya is doing it now.
Yeah.
Donya Shohdi.
Yeah.
I think that club night, I would say that is the beginning of this new promising wave. Because they had something that I personally lacked, which was catering to the crowd. I was more approaching it from I'm a musician I'm lucky enough to be a promoter now, so let me work for my people and do what's best for us. They brought in the other element, the other side of things, and I think that's what led to this sort of growth that you're seeing now. Jelly Zone is obviously a massive name in that area, and also Mushtarak.
Yeah,
of course, yeah.
Mushtarak were a pleasant surprise. They kind of because they're young, they're very early 20s at the moment, so I think they kind of formed during COVID, and since then, post COVID, I would say the kind of how do you say it? The torch has been handed down to them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I definitely feel that, by the way. So like from my understanding, without and not to just basically agreeing with what you were saying, like without Vents, there wouldn't be Donya, there wouldn't be Jelly Zone, perhaps there wouldn't be a Mushtarak. That's kind of my understanding from a music history of Cairo, underground music history of Cairo point of view. I'm pretty sure that Yassine Azuni actually DJ'd with you guys when he was younger, right? Back in
He was 16, yeah. He was 16. I'm sure it's illegal what we did, but he played a few times at Vent.
But that kind of thing also speaks to how young the scene is, doesn't it? I mean, you just as far back as what did you say, like 2017 and around the time of the revolution, things begun to kind of kick off in that sort of time frame. Would you say that that's been part of an overall kind of renaissance of cultural and artistic activity in and around Cairo, or has it been separate and kind of an offshoot by itself?
I personally feel like it's separate. The type of music specifically that came after the revolution, I have a kind of controversial opinion about this. I feel like it did more harm than good, really. In the sense that from the perspective of growth, so a lot of artists were developing their own sounds, which is an essential part of your journey as an artist. And then the revolution came along, and it became obvious that if you made songs, if you made music about the revolution, that's kind of a guaranteed path to success. And most, if not all of them, took that path. And they didn't necessarily grow in any way.
Right, because it was, would you say that it's kind of because if it was more of an activist sort of direction, and eventually those kinds of events become more historical and less contemporarily immediate or relevant, would you say?
Well, my personal opinion about the music at the time is it was kind of pseudo activist, really. If you listen to the stuff and the lyrics and the kind of messages, there was nothing, it was all kind of very, low-hanging fruit type of stuff. Nothing really that made any, difference or.
Yeah. I don't want to name names, but the only Karaoke obviously came up during this thing, obviously not, being a band or whatever, they're still knocking around. And then the only other people that I can really remember, and they weren't even electronic really, I remember El Joker, the rapper, he had a couple of more politically charged bars or EPs in themselves. That's what and also then Joker just fell completely off as well. So
Yeah, I've known Ahmed Joker since before he started rapping. I remember the first time I met him with his crew in Shobra. He was like, "I'm a rapper," so I was like, "Yeah, can you play me something?" He's like, "I haven't even recorded anything yet, but you'll see one day." And we did see one day. He became a Joker. Yeah, he
Nice.
did. He did kind of do that type of material at the time. But to be fair, since the beginning, he's had this idea about his approach to rap has been it needs to be about something that matters and needs to be like
Fair
what they
enough.
call
Okay.
public in Egypt.
Yeah.
But has
Fair
that,
enough.
I think you mentioned earlier that there was, I mean, the explosion of hip hop in Cairo is now massive. Would you say that there was a pre-existing kind of market just waiting for that music to arrive in Cairo, and perhaps the same thing could be said about other forms of that nature like jungle and grime and stuff like that? Or is it something that you think really needs to be built using spaces like Vent and organizations like Mushtaruk and Jelly Zone?
Yeah, I'd say it needs to be built. Um, like every scene, I think, in the world. Um, and in terms of rap, I feel like the reason it exploded like that, because I was there when it happened, and it was so rap globally had become pop music, like we all know. Around that time, pop music had become it infiltrated the mainstream in a way that we hadn't seen in years for rap, since probably the late 90s. Um, and at the same time, that meant that music videos for rap, they had bigger budgets internationally, not in Egypt. They had bigger budgets. The music videos became way more and more impressive. So the filmmakers here in Egypt, who primarily I think work in advertising, they in their own time, their free time, they wanted to make cool stuff. And at the time, cool stuff internationally meant rap. So they adopted a few of those rappers and started making videos for them. And obviously, when you have the visual element, that contributes a lot to your career. At the same time, Molotov, the producer, developed, which I think Molotov is single-handedly, no matter what you think about his music, he's single-handedly responsible for this explosion. The genre he created, and I don't use that term like he created that sound, his molowave, that he calls it molowave.
Yeah.
That's what made rap accessible to the Egyptian masses because it blended between trap and mahraganat. So you hear these familiar sounds in a new, cool, hip way.
Yeah.
Um,
I completely agree with that, by the way. I also think one factor to this as well is the banning of Mahragan and then kind of like the global rise of hip hop. So when it got banned, Hani Shekhar, thank you very much.
Sorry,
When
sorry.
he
Just to clarify that the banning of a genre of music.
it was well, in fact, I'm gonna let Ahmed ZULI explain this a little bit more so
Okay.
than I. He knows a
oh,
little bit more details
maybe
than
you
I.
know more about it than I do. Um, uh, as far because I kind of removed myself from rap around 2017, 2018,
Right.
before the ban happened, like a couple of years before the ban happened.
Yeah. So it's my understanding that like with the global rise of rap, and that's completely correct. But when Hani Shekhar banned Sha'abi music, or more specifically, the events that Sha'abi music was played at called Mahragan, which basically translates to like festival or party, whatever, is kind of one of the reasons, or one of the kind of where the helix interjects. That coupled with Molotov sound and Molotov and all the rest of it. I mean, without Molotov, you wouldn't get massive names like now like El Waili as an example, who's kind of like been on the back of that. But it's also not Molotov's first project. He also did like the Hadea stuff as well before, I
Yeah,
think, which was
and
a lot
100
more like,
copies.
yeah, exactly, a lot more
Mhm.
like acidy and more
Mhm.
interested in that direction. But it was cool.
So
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
just thinking
that
about like that crossover of genres, and as you mentioned, hip hop becoming big because it fit within those two genres that you mentioned, but then one of them being kind of struck off the kind of cultural list in a very kind of official way. Would you say that hip hop then began to take the place of that?
Well, I'm not aware that it was banned for a long
Right.
time. I
Okay.
remember that just the concept of it being banned was what was the most infuriating part of it.
Mm.
It was correct me, I don't know much about Mahraganat and Shabi, so correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is that it's just it's viewed as a lesser art form. That's
Correct.
their main argument. Which was the case when original Shabi came out in the late 70s with Ahmad Adawi, and now it's embraced.
Exactly.
So this is
So
kind of an overall cultural argument that
I think,
exists kind of within Egyptian society about whether this is a valuable genre of music or whether we should just get rid of it. And
yeah,
right.
like a generational thing, I think it might be.
A generational thing, right. Okay.
It really is that and then kind of sitting on top of that whole issue is the musician syndicates of Egypt, which was fronted by a guy called Hani Shaker, who was a very famous like singer, pop artist, kind of the great period, of quote unquote great period. And then now we actually have Mustafa Kemal, who is actually an ex-Shabi singer who's doing the same thing but to rappers currently. So it's like pick a side and stick on it, buddy. Like
right.
it's
Yeah.
it's a hard one.
So that kind of all of that speaks to the way in which a society kind of reacts to a specific kind of genre of music, whether that's hip hop or jungle or anything like that. You kind of mentioned earlier some of the ways in which your audience reacted to the kinds of music that you were playing in Vent. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that specific venue, just in terms of the kinds of difficulties that you might have faced in opening it up, first of all, but then in trying to keep it open over a period of time.
We were kind of lucky in that sense because it was a well-established venue under the name Arabesque before we went there. So they had everything in order with the authorities. They knew who to bribe and everything. Everything was very smooth on the operational front. Our challenge was, because we were kind of in between, we were the first cultural space that served alcohol.
Right, that's a big thing.
Yeah. So people who are used to cultural events, most if not all culture events are sponsored by like the British Council, the French Institute, etc. So they're completely funded. So they're usually free entry, family friendly, so no alcohol, none of that. We had a club aspect to us. We had a clubby side to us, which didn't appeal to those cultural institutions. Up until 2017, they would criticize us for booking artists who use laptops. So we were never on their good side, so we didn't get any funding from them. And then on the corporate side, which funds the house and techno scene or the clubbing scene in particular, we weren't popular enough for them because they want to sell a product at the end of the day. And if you don't have an audience, so why would they sponsor you? So we were in between in terms of funding and also in terms of audience. You get the downtown types, the cultural types. They would criticize us for charging tickets at the door. And then you have the other clubby types who are more, for lack of a better term at the moment, bougie. They wouldn't appreciate the griminess of Vent because it was very DIY grimy. We didn't have a budget to work with when we were setting up in the first season. So we just, us and a bunch of friends, we like painted the walls ourselves, like put up stuff like magazine and cut out, stuff for magazine and stuff.
Yeah.
So that was the challenge, trying to win over an audience and being in the middle of them and each of them accusing us to be members of the other side.
Right, that's an odd position to be in, isn't it?
And you add to that the weird experimental music that didn't help at all.
Yeah.
So I think Vent is now is romanticized about because we all understand the value of it now, but we didn't necessarily feel it at the time. So many musicians have come up to me like years later, be like, "Hey man, kind of sorry about the attitude used to give you guys. We need a space like that now. You took it for granted."
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting because it's not unlike a lot of kind of DIY cultural and musical spaces that I've been involved in, like back in the UK in the past. And usually those places, it's well understood from the get-go that they have a limited amount of time, that they are eventually going to get developed in some way, that they are eventually going to finish, usually because they become luxury flats. What happened to Vent in the end? Why did it go down? I mean, was it as a result of all those criticisms you mentioned, or was there other kind of developmental, financial kind of things afoot?
So the building itself is owned by someone who would rent it out to the first guy we partnered up with. The guy's lease was up after the first season. And as I mentioned before, the place wasn't doing well before we joined it, before we started running it. So during that run, during that season, the guy who owns the building, his grandson came with his friends because he heard about, hey, this place is like popping now and it's the cool place to be. He'd come on those like house and techno nights on Thursdays and Fridays, the ones that where we would make up the money we'd lose during the week. And he really liked what was going on. He was like, yeah, I want in on this. So he told his parents, and his granddad called our partner and he's like, all right, your lease is up. If you want to renew it, you have to pay me like 10 years up front. So I was like, obviously I don't have that type of money. And then that guy called us and he was like, hey guys, I'm taking over and I want to partner up with you and I'm going to invest in renovating the place and stuff. And we did in fact renovate the place, but to his liking. It looked even more bougie and put off a little more of the downtown crowd. But then, so this new company.
This is not what I meant by renovation.
Well, yeah, I understand. You know,
but maybe that was his thinking.
Yeah. No, what happened is that this new company that formed, it's this guy and his parents, they formed a company, and they wanted to make money. So they actually look at what we were doing and interfere and stuff. And they did have a point. They'd be like, why are you booking a punk band on Tuesday? Punk band requires an entire backline to rent out. It's 5 members. And at the end of the day, they only put in a crowd of what, 20 people at most. When we have a pair of CDJs, we can call this house techno DJ, come in, smaller fee, fill out the entire place and make us, a bunch of money. Those type of arguments. They hated the hip hop nights because at the time, hip hop was almost exclusively made by a much poorer class than they're used to seeing.
Right.
And they didn't appreciate that being in their venue, and they even got into fights, which is hilarious because most of these hip hop artists were like under 18, like they're 16 years old. So you'd see this like 50-year-old man get into a fight with a 16-year-old. So they didn't like the way we ran the place, and they felt like they could make more money without us. So yeah, they ended up not renewing with us at the end. And it was kind of this situation where we have a partner who's doesn't care about making money, doesn't care about anything. That was kind of an anomaly. That there's nothing. It's not something that you come across a lot. So we never found another place. And then Asim and I each went our separate ways. I focused on making music more. He's managing Wigs now. You know Wigs, right? Yeah.
Yusha might know it. I can't say that I do.
I'm very much familiar with Wigs. Yeah. I know that he's managing Wigs now. Yeah, or involved with the whole process that is Wigs at the moment. So massive deal as well. By the way, massive deal. Like Wigs is huge.
Enormous.
So you kind of mentioned that you tried to find another place, perhaps unsuccessfully. Do you think that there ever will be the possibility for another vent in Cairo?
Yeah, why not? Why not? I mean, especially with the way things are looking now, but I would say it would need to come from, and this is not just based on Cairo, this is also based on my personal experience as a musician who's been to a few places around the world.
Yeah.
I feel like it has to come from more of patrons of the arts type of people who are like, all right, we don't mind losing money for a few years, but we just love this music and we need to invest in it. And coincidentally, or maybe not coincidentally, the type of people who are pushing this sound at the moment in Cairo, they all have money, and they if they want to, I feel like if they become passionate enough, they could pull it off.
Right. So if there's enough money and enough influence, the people with that will actually do it. But it's
Yeah, if
yeah,
there's enough money, if there's enough passion, they might set up a place to kind of build on this community vibe thing that's forming at the moment and accelerate it in a way.
yeah. Because one of the things I find most interesting about this whole thing is the phenomenon of desert cities like way out outside of like
Yeah.
Sharuk, outside of Cairo, places like Sharuk, for example, where I currently work. And thinking about, given all of this new space that's like being manufactured and the supposed or at least desired out migration,
Mhm.
will there be spaces that open up in a city, Cairo, or is there going to
Right,
be some kind of cultural provision in these new cities?
right.
Because it seems to me like in the new cities, those are very, as we say, bougie kind of areas that probably aren't necessarily going to tolerate these kinds of spaces, this kind of music, or are these exactly the kinds of people that are going to be looking for those kinds of cultural influences in these new
Yeah.
spaces?
Yeah, I think these are the exactly kind of people who are going to be looking for it. And I have more hope in them starting something. And before leaving Cairo, I kind of had this period, I was looking at spaces in Zaid, which is one of these cities outside of Cairo. And I did see a lot of really cool places. And I think there is one venue at the moment which probably aims for a wider spectrum of sounds than ours. But I think there's going to be a place for our sound there. When I say our sound, it sounds ridiculous because there's a million genres, but
Sure.
there is a space for the type of music we operate in and like the Mushtarak guys and stuff. And they're on good terms with these people. So I'm optimistic, to be honest, about the Cairo scene.
Yeah.
Nice.
So just moving into the last 10 minutes, if that's okay, because I want to talk a little bit about Irsh, because I think it's
Yes.
important that we let everyone know about what
Yes.
Irsh is, especially from a kind of UK audience perspective.
Mm.
It seems to me that after Vent closed and forgive me if I'm wrong here, but you guys kind of took it back to the basement, so to speak, and went into almost like a kind of boiler room type situation.
Mm.
Could you speak a little bit about what was the incentive behind Irsh and what was your experience like in putting together a compilation of Cairo
Mm.
artists and musicians in these particular genres?
Mm. No, it's just been amazing, really. It's also been very casual and personal, and it's set up by myself and my partner Rama, who moved to Berlin with me. She's in the other room right now. We set it up because we it was 2019, and I was touring a lot, and whenever I come back to Cairo, we wouldn't find anything interesting happening. Jelly Zone was inactive, kind of, I think, at the time for some reason.
Was it a COVID thing or
I think
It was right before COVID. It was six
right,
months before COVID.
right?
All the club nights were house and techno. And we're not very social people. We like when we hang out with our friends, we like to do stuff. And most of our friends in Cairo are DJs anyway. So we'd invite them over to our house. I have a studio set up. We've got this like little cute controller, and we just film ourselves going back to back. That was the main idea. And it was mainly for us to have something to do, just purely personal. Um, and then COVID happened, and obviously we couldn't have these gatherings anymore. So we thought, well, why don't we ask everyone who's played to send in a track and just put out a compilation? It was as organic and natural as that, and it was a lot of fun to do that. But then the first compilation did so well, we thought, well, maybe let's put together another one, especially because we met the Mushtarak guys. The Mushtarak guys are, I'd say, what, five, six people from a scene or like a group of people who we'd never encountered before. Their early 20s, they live mainly in the suburbs. They reached out to us and we got to know them. They're amazing people, really passionate about music, as DJs and producers as well at the same time. So we thought it might be a good idea to have some of their productions in the compilation. I think a lot of them featured on the second one.
yeah,
It was a lot of
yeah.
fun, and I hadn't been on the hunt for local music like that since the Vent days, where I was in charge of programming, so it was like a routine that I'd go and listen to every single producer popped up from Cairo it was fun to do that again.
Absolutely. I have both of them, both One and Two. As you said very correctly, of course, Two is great because you've got not only like people like yourself and kind of like people from like the roster of the first one, but you have got the whole Mushtarak guys on there. I mean, the opening track is like Yassine's City, isn't it? Like which is such a banger.
Yeah.
Like that it's ridiculous.
It's amazing.
It's such a good track.
Yeah.
But yeah, love that, man. Absolutely love it. I think is there anything cooking when it comes to Urusha? Or is this
There is, but I'm not allowed to talk about it right now.
all right? That's cool. It was a cheeky question anyway. I'm sorry.
avoid. So speaking of things like Ursh and stuff of that nature, it's my understanding that you've recently moved to Berlin, is it? Or
yeah, Berlin.
Might be a bit premature to ask this, but having made that move, has your perspective on the Cairo scene changed in any way? Is there some sort of immediate comparisons that you've registered, differences, similarities between the kind of music scenes, the jungle scene in Europe and Germany and the kind of jungle scene in Cairo?
No, I mean, it's not the move necessarily because I've been touring for a few years. I've been touring for mainly Europe for the past 7 years.
Right.
I think my opinions and about the differences between the scenes kind of formed gradually through that. I think the main difference between really any city and another city is that the type of music we operate in is niche everywhere. Doesn't matter where you go. It's just a matter of degrees, really. So in Cairo, it's just a lot smaller than somewhere like Berlin, but it's still small in Berlin. You don't really see our type of music pulling in like massive numbers. Club nights still average around 150, 200 people here. You get those type of numbers now in Cairo. You get those numbers in Mushtarak. You get those numbers in Jelly Zone and maybe even more. But in terms of like music fans and producers and DJs, we do have them now in Cairo, but it's still a fraction of what you'd see in other cities. That said, all of this has been growing in Cairo, and it's reached a level now that I'm very happy with. I'm very optimistic about, and I honestly surprised by it. I never imagined it to grow that quickly. And the Mushtarak guys, I need to take a lot of credit for that.
Yeah. I've been here for just over a year now in Cairo, and it's been a great experience just kind of exploring this newly emerging, very young, very nascent kind of scene. What do you think, finally, are the ways in which it needs to be built and the ways in which it needs to progress? What do you think people need to be doing, and what do you think are the potential kind of downfalls in terms of the development of the scene overall?
My position on this has more or less been the same for the past 10 years. I think we need to focus more on empowering the artists than we cater to the audience. Because without artists, there can be no scene. And if you don't create an environment for artists to be able to at least make some sort of living from music, we're not going to grow. It can't remain exclusively for people who have money and don't need money. It can't be exclusively for I think it's 5% of Egypt who can afford to do these type of things, who can afford to go out. And it's not just people who can afford, there's also a cultural element to it. So a lot of people who can afford to go out and party don't think it's morally acceptable to go out and party. And then out of the people who think it's morally acceptable to go out and party, most of them are into house and techno. So we're dealing with very small numbers here. So I think it will benefit everyone if we open up. And to be specific, I think we should pay artists, or we should always pay artists. None of this profit share stuff, business. If you want to take a risk as a promoter, you take it on your own. Artists are risking and investing and dedicating time already that they could be using making money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we should empower artists more if you want to move forward.
Okay. Final word to Mr. Yusha Charles.
Quick question that I'm just going to drop really, really quickly, just because a bit of vested interest.
Yeah, we have about 60 seconds.
Yeah, we are. We're really looking forward to having a documentary, and we know that there's Omar Baroud who has been working on this. Really looking forward to seeing this, and I'm sure you are too. Obviously, it's mentioning it's mentioning Vent, it's mentioning Mushtarak, literally everything we've talked about here today. So I'm really looking forward to that from my side. And aside from that, it's an absolute pleasure to chat to you again, man. It's always nice to talk to you. Pretty much that's it.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure's all mine, really.
Thanks very much, ZULI. Great talking to you, and
likewise.
See you again soon, hopefully.
Right. Have a nice one.
See you later.
All right.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.